Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to talk through some relevant news. 49ers injuries. Also got some more good coach speak for Kenneth Walker, as well as go through some mock drafts highlighting wide receiver strategies because, again, it is wide receiver week after all. So hope you guys are having a great morning. And with that, let's introduce today's special guest, co-host, whatever you want to call him. The man's a baller either way. Fantasy Life Zone, Chris Allen. What's going on, Chris?
I don't know much, brother. I'm trying to stay healthy, unlike some of these players we've been hearing about through training camp news. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm staying ready. There's no Q tab next to my name as we hop on the cameras today. But how you going, brother? How you doing, brother?
Doing good, man. It is funny. Shout out to DraftKings. We love DraftKings, obviously. But yeah, on their best ball picks, you actually see players that, CeeDee Lamb right now is listed as out. Christian McCaffrey is listed as questionable. And accordingly, drafters are very terrified to take them. So wish we could see Underdog and some of the other sites do that selfishly. But yeah, obviously want these guys to get better. But first, before we get into that, guys, a quick word on Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, Fantasy Life's premium product, combines really a bunch of cool tools to you for a low price that costs less than a Chipotle burrito per month for even the tier 2 package. So really not trying to break the bank, guys, but if you're looking for consensus ranks, cheat sheets, and just honestly, I think our best tool, Draft Champion, which gives you the opportunity to use customizable settings to really get mock drafts done, whether it's Dynasty, Redraft, Best Ball, Sleeper, ESPN ADP, 12-team, 16-team leagues, keepers, whatever you want, we do give you the opportunity to customize that on your own. And yeah, Chris and I are actually going to be using it later in the show, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, Fantasy Life Plus, everyone, check it out. All right, Chris, you mentioned the injury gods doing fantasy managers no favors. And you know what? They got a little bit of an assist from the Madden curse this time around. The 49ers are hurt, dog. Seemingly not injured. Again, big difference between being hurt and injured, but we at least did get some updates from Kyle Shanahan and company on Tuesday. So first of all, Christian McCaffrey, per Kyle Shanahan, has a calf strain. Did it a couple of days ago. Per Shanny, it's all right. He didn't pull it or anything, but you guys probably won't see him this preseason. Wasn't exactly to see CMC in the preseason anyway, but Chris, one of 3 injuries we got reported because Elijah Mitchell also dealing with a strained hamstring, not a pulled hamstring. Shanahan was very clear on both instances about that. And first-round rookie wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who, hey, I don't know if you guys have heard the Brandon Ayuk rumors going around. Of course you have. I'm kidding. But Pearsall apparently re-injured the same shoulder that he suffered in OTAs. Per Shanahan, I don't know if it's too serious, but that's why we removed him halfway through practice. So obviously, Chris, the big news here is Christian McCaffrey dealing with a calf injury that sidelined him for the last game and a half of last season. So not great to see. That said, you and me, not doctors, but we are friends with several doctors who do great work in the fantasy industry, particularly Dr. Edwin Porras of Fantasy Points. And great stuff from Edmund. You guys should definitely follow him on Twitter. But basically summarizing what he said, calf strains are rarely serious for NFL athletes, and this was likely a ramp-up issue. Since 2018, there have been 25 NFL RBs on the injury report with a calf injury. Only 2 of 25, which is 8%, actually had a re-injury in the season. 0 of 25 actually had a reoccurrence from one calendar year to the next. So another study showed an average missed time of 2.1 games and put the missed mean time from calf strains at 7 to 31 days. So Edwin is hypothesizing that Shanahan was told it's going to be around a 2-week injury. All that said, Chris, doesn't sound like CMC's week 1 availability is exactly in question, although it sure be a lot cooler if he wasn't currently already dealing with an injury.
Yeah, and for CMC specifically, he has been one of those running backs that a lot of drafters have been expecting that age cliff to finally come for him. I mean, entering into his 28-year age season, we're kind of expecting that, right? He's carried the load for the 49ers and previously the Panthers to the point where he was getting those 300 touches, and we were expecting that to kind of at some point he's going to fall off. Now, we're still got a month out. This is still going to be preseason, and to your point and to Dr. Portas's point, this shouldn't be something we should concern us about as much, because I'm looking at the rest of the roster. Who else are we really expecting them to kind of turn to in this? If you're already telling me that Elijah Mitchell's dealing with something, we haven't really heard much about Isaac Guerendo. Cody Schrader's still sitting on the roster, not doing as much from a training camp news perspective. And I mean, their solution has been to bring back Matt Breida. So I'm still looking at this as let's be cautious. The 49ers are doing as much in order to let us know that their RB1 is going to be back at the start of the regular season. So I would continue drafting as normal. But if you wanted to start sprinkling in the Elijah Mitchells of the world and so on and so forth, I think that's not a bad move if you're still in those draft streets right now.
Obviously, McCaffrey regularly been handling really the league's most fantasy-friendly role of any running back over these past few years. And when you combine it with just the ever-well schemed Shanahan 49ers offense, no wonder the man is number one all-time in PPR points per game among all RBs. Yeah, all time. Pretty freaking crazy. So last year, Chris, the difference in total PPR points between the QB1 and QB2 was 13.4. The wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, 12.5. The tight end 1 and tight end 2, 6. Difference between Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall, 122.6 points. So truly can't overstate just how much he was in a league of his own. Please, CMC, get better, because so far over the last week, I've done 2 redrafts and I've come away with Christian McCaffrey inside the first 3 picks both times. So selfishly, don't mess this up, CMC. We, and I mean I, are definitely counting on you this year. So again, Chris, not the only injury though with Elijah Mitchell, also dealing with a strained hamstring. And this is a situation that I think we brought up last week as well, because we actually had Kyle Shanahan in the past. Like last season, got asked around November about Jordan Mason averaging like 5.2 yards per carry. Mitchell was more down at 3.7. And, reporter, I think rightfully, was wondering, hey, what's it going to take for Mason to maybe become the number 2 running back? Or is he that guy already? Shanahan kind of responded with, we look at things more than stats. Elijah's done a great job with this for a long time. He is our number 2 running back. Very assertive. Coach speak we usually aren't able to even get out of a decision maker like Kyle Shanahan. That said, Chris, about a week ago, we actually had Shanahan go back on the record and say nothing against Elijah, but man, Jordan Mason's really been coming on. Basically say he was excited to see how things played out. So not necessarily an open competition. I would still expect Elijah Mitchell to be, number 2 behind Christian McCaffrey. But with him getting banged up, with Jordan Mason having a good camp, all of a sudden, man, when I'm getting the round 17, round 18 of some of these drafts, I'm thinking Jordan Mason might be worth, one of these late round darts.
100%. And I think it's funny, contrast the way that Kyle Shanahan is approaching this injury to his running backs to the way that Dennis Allen was talking about like his backup running back just a couple of weeks ago about, man, it'd be great if you was out there on the field, but you got to stay healthy in order to, like, we're not hearing that from Kyle Shanahan. So it's just interesting how different coaches approach like similar injury news like for their backup players. But in either case, yeah, I think there's a chance that like while when Mitchell has been the one on the field, like he has been the one to at least give the 49ers that pop from a rushing perspective that they need. Jordan Mason has like been, at least from a explosive standpoint, like from an explosive rushing rate, like Mason has been the one to be a bit better in that regard. But if we're just looking for a runner that's capable of keeping the 49ers like on schedule, able to help convert like if they do wind up running in short yardage situations, Mitchell has been that guy. We've seen him used like on the goal line in some stretches when they've had to spell CMC for a bit. So either or, and I do think this is like legitimately, like not to say that, like be wishy-washy or anything like that, either have a shot in order to operate. But I think that for either Mitchell or Jordan Mason specifically, like they don't operate in the passing game as much as CMC has. Like not right. The most targets that Jordan Mason has gotten in a single season has been 14. Mitchell's like highest target share has been like 20. I mean that like Christian McCaffrey did like all of that in like inside about 4 weeks. So I like if we're just looking for a rushing, like a guy that can come in, gain a few yards on the ground, and then keep the 49ers on schedule, either capable of doing that. But if we're talking about the efficiency of the 49ers offense as a whole, I mean, CMC is the only one that can do that. And we all know that.
And it really is that pass down role, which is why when I was doing my handcuff tiers a couple of weeks ago, I didn't have Elijah Mitchell in the top 2. Tier 1 was guys like Jaylen Warren, who are already pretty much starting in your fantasy lineup anyway. Tier 2 was 1 injury away from being a legit RB1. Tier 3, where Mitchell falls, 1 injury away from being a solid fantasy RB2. Again, like, yeah, he's going to be on the cover of all the waiver wire articles if something happens to CMC in week 7 or whatever. But to Chris's point, I mean, it's not like when CMC wasn't on the team in 2021 or got got banged up at the end of last year that we were all of a sudden, crossing out CMC's name in the weekly ranks and putting Elijah Mitchell there. Very good. I mean, RB15, I'm talking about Mitchell and PPR points per game throughout the 2021 season. And even last year, I mean, RB19 and RB14 in the back half of week 17 and then in the week 18 when CMC was dealing with this very same issue. But again, Jordan Mason coming on strong, could certainly be more of a split moving forward. So also would mention, for those of you that forgot, fourth round rookie Isaac Guerrero also dealing with a hamstring injury. So truly a walking, talking graveyard in this 49ers RB room right now. 29-year-old Matt Breida, fresh off averaging a robust 2.7 yards per carry. Not sure he's going to be making a big impact. But you know what? We've seen weirder situations. This Seahawks have been one of these teams, Ravens, over the years, they kind of bring someone in off the streets. They're willing to give him a bigger role than we might expect. Something to monitor for sure as we get into the preseason. Last point on the 49ers, Chris, is Ricky Pearsall, again, dealing with the same shoulder injury. Not exactly been a great camp. And they're in a time of year where everyone, is getting rave reviews. With Pearsall, it's actually one of these things we're hearing he's having trouble separating and then obviously dealing with one injury after another. So for now, Brandon Ayuk is a member of the 49ers, but we already got CMC accidentally saying he's a former teammate. I mean, let's say, Chris, that it does happen, that Brandon Ayuk ends up getting traded to the Steelers or whoever else. I mean, is Pearsall really still someone you're going to be going out of your way for? Because, man, this is an offense that likes to run a lot of 12 personnel with Kyle Juszczyk and even some of their other tight ends. And I do have a hard time thinking that Pearsall is going to overly lap, especially not Deebo Samuel, and maybe even Jawan Jennings.
Right. And I think that's where we have to be a little bit cautious when trying to chase that value up the charts, because I think a lot of people are going to instantly look to Pearsall as the guy they're going to want to draft without recognizing the fact that Jawan Jennings also got the bag like during the offseason.
Yeah.
And of course, like George Kittle, who's been that guy that's been more of a like consistent, I would say, from a season long standpoint, but he does have those low points like throughout the regular season where he is asked to be more of a blocker. There is more production for Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. So if I'm looking at the situation and thinking like, okay, well, CMC is already kind of hurt, so that's not all that great from an efficiency standpoint for the entire offense. And they're talking about moving on from Brandon Ayuk. So really the two reliable, at least production pieces for this 49ers offense is going to be Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. Okay, I'm kind of concerned about how this offense is going to look, and if we're now going to pin our hopes on Ricky Pearsall, who's been injured multiple times throughout the offseason, I don't know, that kind of hurts my hopes for one Brock Purdy and all the conversations I'm sure we're going to wind up having should he continue to ball out like he has over the past couple of seasons. But I'm with you. I'll look at Ricky Pearsall and like in draft him where he's at right now. Continuing to draft him once he starts getting boosted up, like if we do get the final confirmation that Ayuk's moving on from San Francisco, I'm less inclined to do that. I'll take my shots on Jawan Jennings, who's probably still free in most drafts.
Again, last year, only Jawan Jennings and Puka Nacua received a PFF run blocking of 80. There's a lot of really good things that, again, maybe don't show up on the box score, but to Chris's point, got paid. Kyle Shanahan loves that dog in him. So I've already got a, rough draft of the Brandon Ayuk trade going, trying to stay ahead of the masses out here in the, ever quick fantasy industry, everyone. And basically just, if we do see Ayuk traded, again, CMC's already going 101. That's not going to change anything. But I think Deebo becomes an instant, top 10 wide receiver alongside guys like Puka Nacua and like Garrett Wilson. George Kittle, for me, becomes the tight end 4. I mean, the only guys I would really rank ahead of him, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, and Mark Andrews. And Ricky Pearsall does get a nice bump, but I think, him around kind of fellow youngins like Dontavian Wicks, Josh Downs, Xavier Leggett, more in that wide receiver 5 range of guys where, you can kind of talk yourself into them potentially breaking out if a couple things go their way, but also not someone you're instantly going to be in week 1 confident about throwing in that wide receiver 2 slot. So Pearsall, maybe again a little bit of hype, but also don't want to be too low on anyone that was good enough to get their name called inside the first 32 picks of any NFL draft. So please, for the love of God, and especially fantasy managers, get healthy San Francisco 49ers players. Chris, relatively light news day yesterday, at least compared to some of the action we've had going, but wanted to kind of swing back to something that we've mentioned, but we had another quote go for, so why not? Kenneth Walker is starting to get, a lot of hype from the Seahawks coaching staff. Last week, we talked about Mike McDonald giving some love to Walker, talking about how their running back coach gives me a little hint. let's feed this guy. He can be special every time they talk out. And then, we also had Seahawks offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb say yesterday, I think he gets better every single day. I think the sky's the limit for him, yada, 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 whatever. I think he's a really, really talented, I said the whatever part, just to be clear. I think he's a really, really talented, powerful back. That's a true three-tool guy. He's electric out of the backfield as a pass catcher. And that's the part that kind of piqued my interest, Chris, because when you look back at Walker, I mean, the big debate coming out of Michigan State was, hey, this guy hasn't caught many passes in his career. Can he even be this, 3-down running back potentially if a team wants to give him that role? And we've seen him be fine enough at the NFL level. I don't think he's, Christian McCaffrey or Austin Eckler out there or anything, but certainly seems capable. He is a freaking finely tuned athletic machine. Shout out Waterboy back in the day out there. So not saying he can't catch some dump downs, but special runner in the open field, a little bit boomer busty. And Chris, I've talked about throughout this offseason, Walker being someone I haven't made a habit of drafting. I've been taking more of Zach Charbonnet later because he is, again, the cheaper option. I think he's a great handcuff regardless of how big Walker's role is. And just because he's, again, not taking, the same sort of reverse field chances as Walker, I just think that, again, the sort of plays that Grubbs is drawing up, I imagine Charbonnet, is bringing to life more so what Grubb has in mind. 4 yards are blocked. I think, Charbonnet is more consistently getting 4 yards. Walker might get you 0, might get you 40 out there. So that's what I think, man. But, the more we hear about this, the more it's like, well, Mike Macdonald, defensive-minded head coach, Walker is really good. And I'm not debating that. What do you think the chances, Chris, that we could be looking at almost a 2022 Josh Jacobs situation here where new coaching staff comes in? Yes, there are other parties involved, but maybe we're ignoring the still pretty young, still pretty talented running back at the top and what he could do with the 3-down role. Because let's face it, if the Seahawks do sign up Kenneth Walker and we're sitting here after week 1 and it's like 20 carries and 5 targets out there, he's going to be tough to keep out of those RB1 ranks in a hurry. And right now we can't afford him, as more of a mid-tier RB2.
I don't know about the Josh Jacobs 2022 comp, because at least in that, and we were talking before the show, there wasn't
a little aggressive.
Yeah, it's a little aggressive because we didn't have the same legitimate competition behind Josh Jacobs that we do in Zach Charbonnet. Right? We've seen Charbonnet operate as both a runner and a pass catcher. It wasn't a lot, wasn't enough to say that, ooh boy, he nice, keep him out there and he should force a 50-50 split with Kenneth Walker. That's not what I'm saying. But at least there were points during the 2023 season where Charbonnet was able to get out there, feature not just the running back portion of it, where he was able to be somewhat efficient as a rusher. And that is, I guess, the context with that being that the Seahawks offensive line was in shambles throughout most of the 2023 season, but also he could operate as a pass catcher as well. And that was part of his profile coming out of college. And actually looking at some of the advanced metrics, Charbonnet did grade out to see slightly better than Kenneth Walker from a rushing success rate. Charbonnet was around the 39% rushing success rate. Kenneth Walker was around 36-37%. So I mean, both of them were let's say in around the 20th ranked running backs from a success rate perspective, amongst all the rushers in the league. So it's not anything to get super excited about. But if we already know that Charbonnet can be that guy, like you were just talking, if Ryan Grubb and Mike Macdonald wants to have a guy that just gets what's blocked for him, we know that Sharps can do that for them. Now, Kenneth Walker has been more of that boom bust player, almost in the ilk of Dameon Pierce, where once he hits the hole and he's gone, he's gone. And if they do want to still have that as a part of their rushing offense, Walker still provides that. So now if he's showing the consistency that they want, from a down in, down out type perspective, where he is creating some of those short yardage type of situations for Geno Smith, setting up the passing game. Okay, great. That is what will then put him into that top 12 type conversation. Throw in some passing game work as well. Okay, now I can see it. But Charbonnet, I think from a structural standpoint, I've been leaning towards Charbonnet as well, because I'm hammering those wide receivers in the early rounds. Once it gets to the 5th, 6th round, where Kenneth Walker typically goes, I'm looking at the wide receiver to typically give me the Deontay Johnson of the world, give me the JSNs of the world that's going about maybe a roundish later. I'm looking more at the wide receivers. But the only way that Walker can challenge or can change my ideas, hearing news like this, where he is improving from that down in, down out perspective, and that I know he's going to have that workload and it's going to be less of a factor, and Charbonnet might be less of a factor in terms of trying to challenge him for work in 2024.
looking at his ADP using our FantasyLife ADP tool that I continue to gush about, but for good reason. It's pretty freaking cool, people. But yeah, with again Walker right now, ESPN, Yahoo, he's going around pick 48, so basically the end of round 4. And I haven't exactly been, taking other running backs ahead of him at that point. It's been more so the reality that guys like Mark Andrews, Anthony Richardson, Trey McBride, like this is also, Chris, like we still got some good wide receivers on ESPN. It's ridiculous. I mean, Devonta Smith and Deebo Samuel, Jalen Waddle are freaking going in that range. Like that's not even close. I'm taking those wide receivers 9 times out of 10. But then also the elite onesies. So, the Josh Jacobs comp is not perfect because Jacobs, especially after the Hall of Fame usage we had going on, was going quite a bit later than what we're having with Walker right now. But it is a situation that, again, not trying to be, believe it or not, Chris, I have not been 100% on my preseason predictions every single year. And when we're hearing Walker, again, a talented guy who we recognize getting the potential for the 3-down role, I do think it is worth remembering. So, round 5, round 6, that is certainly more so where I would like to draft him. And that actually is where he is going a bit more in the higher stakes sites, NFFC, FFPC. We actually see Walker going, pick 55 and pick 63 respectively. So Seahawks offensive line ranked 31st by PFF this year. And also we have Brandon Thorne from Establish the Run ranking them 29th. So not the best situation, probably overthinking it, but I was going to bed at midnight last night and this freaking thought was in my head, Chris. So happy we could talk that out. Kenneth Walker, not completely out on, but yeah, I'm going to continue to draft again, probably some of those more elite onesies around that spot. But hey, we can find out here in just a few minutes when we get into mock draft season. So that was the big news, everyone. But now, as always, going to go through rapid fire some of the other big takeaways from, again, a fairly uneventful Tuesday in the NFL. More unofficial depth charts. Russell Wilson was indeed listed ahead of Justin Fields for now, which again kind of reflects the general sentiment out of Pittsburgh ever since they traded for Fields back in March. A.D. Mitchell and Alec Pierce also listed as co-starters over in Indianapolis, continuing to battle it out for that wide receiver 3 job. Michael Pittman and Josh Downs easily ahead of both at the moment. Broncos depth chart, Jarrett Stidham, QB1, Zach Wilson, QB2, and Bo Nix, QB3. I believe I saw Connor Allen note that Bo Nix is actually still a minus 200 favorite to go ahead and start week 1. So wouldn't really worry about Zach Wilson being ahead. And everything we've heard out of practice is actually that Nix, not Wilson, has been, rotating with Stidham with the first team as of late. With the Vikings, again, what we've been hearing, QB Sam Darnold is actually the QB1 right now. JJ McCarthy tied with Nick Mullins on the second string. Horrible stretch for the Vikings to start the season. And that's the thing I think we got to remember here, guys. As much as it could be Sam Darnold for the time being, I mean, I'll read it to you guys right now. They start off the year reasonable enough game against the Giants. Then got the 49ers, Texans, Packers, and Jets before their week 6 bye. So even if it is going to be Darnold to start the year, I would put a lot of money on McCarthy being out there by week 7 at the absolute latest. Chargers signed UFL passing god Luis Perez, was MVP of the XFL championship game in 2023. Shout out Luis. Ravens signed Russell Gage off of his ruptured patellar tendon from last year. 28 years young. Such a Ravens signing, getting these, veteran wide receivers, a lot of them coming off injury, but good luck, Russell. And John Machado of The Athletic said Rico Dowdle, quote unquote, has to be a favorite to lead the Cowboys in rushing. Remains a very good pick in the double-digit rounds of most drafts. Injury updates. Sean McVay said Puka Nacua is expecting to be ready for week 1, quote unquote, really just had a little bit of a burst of sack, kind of burst it, and it's just going to be week to week with him. Nothing serious, nothing structurally. So yeah, Chris and I were talking about what the hell a burst of sack even is before the show started. Sounds kind of concerning, but guys like Dr. Edwin Porras, not overly concerned. McVay isn't concerned. Slight bump down the ranks for Puka. Joy McFarland, I know, updated his ranks recently and had guys like Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs go ahead of him, but still at the round 1, round 2 turn, especially into the early parts of round 2, tough to argue with the reigning wide receiver 6, I believe, in Fantasyland. Keep an eye on Noah Fant, walked off the field midway through practice and did not return. Tucker Kraft, meanwhile, in Green Bay, is back at practice. No team drills just yet, recovering from the torn pec, but does seem like he has a good chance of splitting time with Luke Musgrave as early as week 1. Sam Laporta, guys, does have a minor hamstring issue, but a hamstring issue nonetheless. Keep an eye on that. And Titans guard Sadiq Sadiq Charles retired, was expected to be their starter. Not exactly great news for PFF's reigning 32nd ranked offensive line. Final 3 notes. Malik Neighbors started to fight in practice, and this was interesting, Chris. So he started the fight on a play where, kind of jump ball in the end zone fell incomplete. Another Giants reporter noted that Malik Neighbors caught 17 of 18 targets thrown his way in these cross practice against the Lions, and that means that Malik Neighbors has started a fight every single time that he's had a target not be caught thrown his direction, so far in these cross practices. So could be a fun storyline to keep watching as we get into the regular season. Again, mentioned the CMC referring to Ayuk as a former teammate in an interview, getting the most steam out of the Steelers and Browns at the moment, but stay tuned there. And then finally, the biggest news here is that Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon gave our guy Greg Dortch all sorts of love, noting he speaks softly and carries a big stick, and he's going to have, quote unquote, a big year. So, Chris, I don't always listen to just kind of general coach speak propaganda, but when I do, it's going to be about Greg Dortch. So that was the news, everyone. And now a quick word about our friends at HelloFresh. Hey, everyone, just a friendly reminder that, it's always a great day to be great. I say that quite a few times. And let me tell you, my wife has whipped up a few meals from HelloFresh, and they were absolutely amazing. And yeah, it's pretty nice actually being able to get some ingredients out there that are new, refreshing week to week, and don't actually take, multiple hours to go ahead and prepare. Very easy, convenient, refreshing, and bursting with flavor. I mean, at this point, trying to decide what I want for dinner is tougher than trying to figure out what Houston Texans wide receiver I should be targeting in fantasy drafts. Nico Collins, by the way. But anyways, if you're gearing up for fantasy football drafts and don't have time to run for the grocery store, truly don't sweat it. HelloFresh has the right pick for you. And this is huge for me, guys. Like, I love food as much as the next guy or girl in the world, but it does take a lot of time to prepare. So really appreciate people like HelloFresh making it easy for us. You don't have time to run to the grocery store. Don't sweat it. HelloFresh has the right pick for you. They ensure there's something delicious for everyone to enjoy with a changing menu of not 1, not 2, not 3, but 50. Hear that, LeBron? 50 recipes to choose from each and every week, making dinner preparation as easy as picking your lineup, when you got a sick team to pick from. So HelloFresh is easy to follow. Recipes include pre-portioned ingredients delivered fresh, so no last-minute grocery store run required. Just choose your delivery date, open your box, and get cooking. And this is important, guys, for a limited time, kids eat free. The kids. We love the kids. Go to HelloFresh.com/FantasyLifeKids. That's HelloFresh.com/FantasyLifeKids to unlock this exclusive offer. 1 free kids meal per box for 2 months while subscription is active. That's free kids meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/FantasyLifeKids. HelloFresh, we appreciate you. Chris, it is mock draft Wednesday, which means we're going to do some freaking mock drafts, my friends. So again, shout out to Fantasy Life Plus and particularly our draft champion tool, because as much as I do love getting reps in the best ball streets and getting ready for my home league draft that way, again, can't say enough good things about our tool here and just the ability, whether you want to do regular 2024 fantasy, best ball, or what I think is especially hard to find in the industry, dynasty mock drafts, man, we give you everything. So scoring, standard, half PPR, custom. You can do third round reversal if you're into that communist BS. You can change the number of teams, roster positions. Again, we really do try to give you all the customizable options possible, especially keepers, because I know I get a ton of questions this time of year, wonky keeper settings and everything. So yeah, I'm trying to hook it up for you guys. So goal, Chris, is to do 3 of these. We're going to go heavy wide receiver in the first one, basically take a wide receiver in each of the first 4 rounds, no matter what. Then we're also going to go light wide receiver. Couldn't think of a cooler name. My apologies, but 2 running backs inside the first 2 rounds, and then just again not really overloading our wide receivers early. We're gonna see what that squad looks like, and then elite quarterback and tight end, where we focus more so on the onesies early on. So looks like, Chris, we are picking 102, 103 over here. Yeah, 103. Like so yeah, sure seems like Tyreek Hill is our pick here. So we will go ahead and lock that in. You personally, though, Chris, again,
with like 30% target share.
Right, that'll work. But heavy wide receiver, that's what we're doing here. But just personally, Chris, when you are at the 103, I feel like CMC and CD are fairly consensus. I may or may not have the 103 pick in my home league draft, so this continues to freak me out. But it does seem like Tyreek Hill off the contract extension. I mean, this dude could have 200 targets inside one of the best offenses. As much as I do believe in Bijan and to a slightly lesser extent Breece Hall, I do think you got to take Tyreek ahead of those guys, particularly in full PPR.
Well, because at least who are you going to be able to get in the second round that would even come close to like Tyreek Hill's production? And I'm not saying that you should be able to find like a Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, but it's like it's what you're giving up in order to draft like Bijan or Brees ahead of Tyreek Hill. And this is a guy that's had like 30% target share like in back-to-back seasons. His yards per route one last year was a hilarious 3.85 like last year. Like there were
Oh
only
my
like
God.
3 or 4 other players that were over three. So it's like if he's that efficient and earning that much volume in an offense that we know is going to be like leaning towards the run or leaning towards the pass rather and passing downfield, I mean, like Tyreek Hill, it's hard to find a guy like him in the second round. So yeah, it's Tyreek Hill for sure.
Obviously getting him in round one, but certainly still hard to find a guy like that in round one as well. So, guys, we are through again 3 rounds at this point. Went Tyreek Hill, Drake London, and Nico
Sick.
Collins. Drake finally starting to fly up that ESPN ADP. I know we've been talking for a while now about him being one of the mispriced guys, but yeah, as you can see, again, we are dealing with ESPN, so running backs maybe a bit more frequent than you're used to seeing elsewhere, but still with some values. Devin Achan falling a little bit to the 304. Guys like
Mhm.
Stephon Diggs, Michael Pittman really going right around Nico. So it is this point, we just had, let's see, Debo, DJ Moore, Cooper Cup go in at round 4 before our pick. So hitting a bit of a tier break. But again, for the purposes of this study, we're going to take one more wide receiver. Chris, Zay
Mhm.
Flowers, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, George Pickens. Draft champions telling us Zay Flowers, but who would you take out of this group of, pretty solid kind of borderline wide receiver twos?
I would say T. Higgins just on that. If you go back to the board real quick, because
You're
it
not
is like
biased at all.
no, not biased, but I'm also thinking about like what we could do like in the next round afterwards. Because if we go Zay Flowers, is Mark Andrews like still there, or was he already taken? I wasn't sure if from an elite onesie standpoint, like could we wind up taking him? Because then it's like so
He
if we could
went just
get
a few
T
picks
here, oh he
after.
just went there it was. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking. Like if we could go T and then on the wrap like wind up getting like Mark Andrews or something like that, so we're not creating that inherent stack and not get Lamar Jackson by going Zay. So either one of the two would be
So
fine.
again, Tyreek, London, Nico, T. Higgins. Now, if we were in a 3 wide receiver multi flex, sort of situation, you actually could rationalize going even more wide receivers because, you are in some of these leagues where
Mhm.
you can start 5 or 6 guys at the position. For this case, I do believe we did the ESPN default, 2 wide receiver sets. So one of these guys already is not going to be able to start if we do only have one flex. So I do think we are good on wide receiver for now. And we will again go from here and see what we can make happen. So overall, top, recommended. We still got the elite onesies, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, but then Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Anthony Richardson kind of filling out the other spots. So I do think at this point, Chris, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, DeAndre Swift, James Conner seems like a reasonable spot to take some RBs. Like we should still have a chance to get a George Kittle type, hopefully in the next round. Now that I said that, we'll probably get jinxed because that's what happens in fantasy football. Never talk about future draft picks. But out of
Exactly.
this group of
Yeah.
guys, Chris, is there a running back you prefer? Because I'm not out on Aaron Jones, but I do think Stevenson probably a better chance at a 3-down roll. And then meanwhile in Detroit, man, whether it's DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams or more recently Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery, one of the more fantasy friendly offenses in the NFL when it comes to enabling fantasy friendly running backs.
I would lean Stevenson as well, and that's just more from a qualitative standpoint. The offense, piloted by Jacoby Brissett, we think is going to be a bit more stable than whatever is going to be Sam Darnold, whenever we see JJ McCarthy or whatever. But also, if you don't want to have to like choose or think about like the qualitative like comparisons between the two, take a look at our rankings and tiers. It kind of boxes in a few of those running backs. So even if you are stuck between Aaron Jones or Ramondre Stevenson, from a tiers perspective, it doesn't matter as much. You're still going to get like minus any of the games that Aaron Jones might miss because of the injury concerns, at least from a production standpoint, if all things were equal, if they're going to play for a full 17 game season, like we're expecting to get similar production out of the two. So either way, like you're kind of coming out with the same type of running back.
Still got some fairly solid wide receivers, available in round 6, which is a good reminder of things that happen on ESPN. I mean, my God, he's not available, in this one, which is good because it'd be pretty ridiculous. But Malik Neighbors, I believe, is still like pick 67, pick 68 ESPN
Good
average
night.
ADP, which is bonkers. Probably won't happen
Yeah.
in your home league, but you can imagine if it did. So still have guys like Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, just something to
So
keep
many
in
good
mind. But again,
receivers.
already very much set at wide receiver, at least for the time being. So, Chris, quarterback, we have Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy. I think we can maybe get away with, again, at this point, we are going around the turn, so we're going to have another pick pretty soon. I mean, how do you feel? We have Jalen Warren, Jonathan Brooks, Najee Harris. It's like, do we want one of the Steelers running backs, or do we want to attack QB and tight end over these next two picks? Because I will say, after Kyler, a little bit of a teardrop for me. And then at tight end, I mean, we need to get one of Njoku and Jake Ferguson, I feel like. Otherwise, we're going to have to really play catch up at that position.
And here's one of the things that I've typically talked about in the draft series. If you are on FantasyLife.com, go and check out the draft kit. I've drafted from at least 11 positions. I'm writing up the 12th one, and that'll be out here later today. But if you are drafting closer to the turn, one of the things you can do to cheat, take a look at the guys that are drafting behind you. So if we're sitting at the 103, take a look and see, does the 102 and 101 already have a quarterback? If yes, then maybe we can push Kyler to the next one. So it looks like they have. So less likely we have to worry about taking a quarterback right now, and then we can take a running back now and get the quarterback we want like after the turn.
Okay, that sounds good to me. So we'll go ahead and wait on tight end, and we'll just go ahead and lock in Mr. Jalen Warren. So again, I like to think we got pretty good AI here, but you know what? When you're in real drafts with real humans as well, can't necessarily guarantee that they're going to be acting all that rationally sometimes, as well with what's going on. So Kyler Murray is still available though. And again, great point by Chris. Try to read your room, try to realize again what other people have when you are going to be, waiting on position. So also something to do in best ball land, even though you will inevitably get sniped like I did yesterday when I freaking had, no one cares, I get it, but yeah, got sniped. I was mad on the treadmill. It was a scene. But okay, here we are again going into rounds.
I could go into that.
It happens, man. It happens. So just gonna again kind of round out this draft. We will take another wide receiver here. I'll get a tight end, and then we'll go ahead and kind of sim things out and see what the simulator is giving us grade wise. But tight end, Brock Bowers at this point, someone that I'm not overly high on, but again, when you do have a quote unquote generational talent at the position, maybe we see him, have a pretty damn good rookie year and fell to us a little bit here. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this draft do its thing, simulate the rest, which again is one of the cool features here. Don't have to sit through each and every pick if you do not want to, and we will get the grade, see who we drafted most like, and then where we maybe could have improved afterwards. So again, I do think that going into some of the best ball streets and getting live reps with people actually risking money is, a pretty good way of getting ready for your home leagues. But guess what? Different settings, and then honestly, just all the keeper logic and stuff that goes into that. I do think this draft champion tool does a pretty good job of helping you out from there. So overall, grade B. We have the number 1 wide receivers in the league. Good. We did use our first 4 picks on them after all. Number 3 quarterback, just a bit weak at running back, and then tight end as well. So projected standings, not loving us, but pretty flat across the league. Top player, obviously, Tyreek Hill. We drafted most like our guy Faraz, which, not a bad thing by all. Also got a B from myself and Matthew Berry, so gotta love that. Notes our top values. I will say in a regular home league draft, again, we send at the end, but you get someone like Kyler Murray, you really don't need to be using a fellow top 11, top 12 round pick on someone like Caleb Williams, because guess what? You're starting Kyler Murray each and every week. But yeah, and this is one of my favorite parts as well, to kind of try this portion where, Mark Andrews was someone that we were hoping might come back around to us. Unfortunately, weren't able to get him. But if we had taken Mark Andrews instead of T. Higgins, would have received an A-. So again, Chris, that was 4 wide receivers heavy early. I will say, again, in general, when we have just 2 wide receiver spots to fill, not a bad idea to maybe cut that off at 3, because again, drafting someone in round 4 who physically we cannot start, in week 1, that's where I do draw the line and think maybe we went a little bit overboard.
Yeah, and that's where your league settings, whether you're starting 2 at the wide receiver position or 3, because some leagues do have that might change like how much you're going to allocate to each position. But for this type of build in this setting, I think I'm okay with it. But to your point, switching up the Mark Andrews for T decision, that might have been just the way to really bring this draft home.
Yes, so we will see what happens next when we get into more of a light wide receiver build. But first, a quick word on our friends over at DraftKings. Whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, there's an even better way to get in on the action. Check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. All you got to do is download a DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our promo code FantasyLife. Again, $5 to instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. So preseason football is on the way. And, some people like to say that you got to be a sick man to bet on preseason. Well, give me my mask, give me my freaking, medicine, whatever the hell, because I'm certainly going to be betting on it in addition to some good baseball and obviously MMA goodness. So again, love our friends over at DraftKings. Bet $5, instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FantasyLife. Remember, the crown is yours. All right, guys, next we're going to do light wide receiver. Basically going to start off with 2 running backs and then get 2 wide receivers, and then we'll kind of simulate and see how the rest of things end up. But again, just not really going hard in the paint at wide receiver early, which, can be tough, particularly when we're picking from this spot in the draft where, Jahmyr Gibbs is our best available running back. So maybe more of a strategy that I would be doing personally, at the top of the draft. I mean, when we're at the 101, 102, you get a chance to get CMC. And I've had certain situations, Chris, where Devin Achane then comes back to me around the turn. And it's just like, there's a world where both CMC and Achane go bonkers. And if that happens, pretty good to have them both on the squad. So again, in this iteration, went Jahmyr Gibbs, RB1. Chris, for the sake of the mock draft, we're going to go ahead and grab another RB here. Kyren Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, Devin Achane. What say you?
Devin Achane. If there's a guy that, I think we argued about this like over the offseason, me, you, and Dwayne. If there was a guy that's going to wind up really challenging for that top spot, like to be with the CMCs, Breece Halls, and Bijan Robinson, I mean, it is Devin Achane. Like he has got the offensive situation, he's got the explosive talent that we saw throughout his rookie season last year. I mean, all of that combined, and like also the talent behind him is something that like we were respecting right now, Raheem Mostert and so on and so forth. But if he really gets just all the rushing and some of the passing game as well, and we know that the Dolphins need that third pass catcher to go into their offense, I mean, Achane be in the top 3 next
to Smith right here. Also could have looked at Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp certainly in play at that point. But yeah, I think it's a good reminder that as much as I do think there's a pretty fairly, clear-cut tier of wide receivers at the top, Chris. I mean, once you kind of get past Drake London, that's where I usually draw the line. There's one red flag or another for a lot of those guys. And again, I think without Ayuk, Debo all of a sudden becomes one of the safe top 10, top 11 wide receivers we can trust. But, from like Nico Collins all the way going down to, that wide receiver 23, 24 spot with someone like Cooper Kupp, like DJ Moore. Again, I prefer Nico. We have our ranks for a reason. But for me, Chris, the wide receiver 2 tier, pretty freaking long, man. So again, if I do miss out on the top 10, top 11 guys, I don't mind taking a Devin Achane in round 2 because I really don't think sometimes there's that big of a difference between the wide receiver 13 and say the wide receiver 18.
Yeah, and we have to look at the total target shares or the potential target shares for each of those guys. They're relatively flat. And honestly, the way that I'm thinking about it now, and I want to get your thoughts on it, I mean, a lot of the fantasy community is already trying to box in this like Brandon Ayuk trade, like moving him down, moving Debo up, moving Kittle up. But we've also heard rumors about, well, if he goes to the Browns, it's going to be potentially Amari Cooper going back. So, like, are we also adjusting for some of those guys and their move, that like the moves that might happen with it? If Ayuk goes to the Steelers, does now Pickens have to move down as well if he winds up going to the Steelers? I mean, some of those things I'm trying to at least be cognizant of. Whereas, like, I wasn't targeting Amari Cooper as much like throughout the early rounds, but now it's like, all right, I already know he's going to be the wide receiver for Deshaun Watson. We're talking about him being a late round target for quarterbacks. But now if he's also going to get this bump of, well, even if he doesn't move from Cleveland, he could go to San Francisco. Now he's like, I don't know. Like I kind of like where he's going at in drafts right now. I'm not chasing him up the drafts, but at the very least, he's become more of a target than he was like earlier in the offseason.
Speaking of chasing, we did go ahead and select Chase Brown over there in round 9. I believe I am flying through a good portion of this draft. But again, we'll go ahead and show you guys the draft board here in just a sec and summarize things. But again, Chris, and we've done this a couple times now, and I think we both come to realization that when possible. Depends how the board breaks. Again, I don't like to enter any of these things with a predetermined strategy. We do that for you guys today to again show kind of what some of them look like. But again, it's how the board falls and how you kind of adjust from there. But generally, Chris, if I just had to ask us like, hey, how do we want this draft to go? In a perfect world where, we're getting our guys around ADP, we're not, being put in tough situations, which happens during drafts. But if things go great, I really do think hero RB and sometimes even that superhero RB, getting 2 inside the top 4 rounds, when you can still get your wide receivers attached to that. And maybe you get the onesie quarterback or, a Kyler or a Kyle Pitts falling to you just a little bit. That tends to be my favorite, man. Not that there's anything wrong with pure zero RB, but I really do feel better about my entire roster construction when I can get 1 or even in this case, 2 running backs and Gibbs and Achane inside the first few rounds.
It's definitely a function of where I draft at, because like we were talking earlier, if I'm at the 103, I'm not, and then of course CMC is already gone. I'm not going to take Bijan or Brees over like Tyreek Hill.
Right.
I'm not doing that. But now if I'm in like some of the later portions of the draft where taking a Brees Hall, a guy that was getting more targets on a per rate or per route standpoint than CMC once he was actually fully healthy. I mean, now he does have Aaron Rodgers back, and we can assume a bit more scoring opportunities for the Jets like this season. I can justify that. And Bijan Robinson, we're already excited about. Like those types of guys, like we're excited about drafting in those spots. So if I can get that anchor running back and then layer in like all the wide receivers there afterwards, like the Nico Collins of the world, that not Tyreek Hill, but some of the guys that are going in like the second, third round, whether it's Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, like insert name here, Cooper Kupp. Like those guys, I get the flexibility of getting my running back early, the guy that I know I'm going to start and want to start week in and week out, without really falling prey to that wide receiver avalanche that we know is coming in rounds like 2 through like 6, 7, 8, 9. Like I don't have to fight that. I'm getting all of my wide receivers while still having a strong starter at the running back position.
Final note on the draft, I really do like Ty Chandler kind of in that range of low-end RB4s. He goes alongside Marshawn Lloyd, Jaleel McLaughlin, who, again, I see the path to success for those guys. They're looking really good. We're practicing in shorts in July and August. But Ty Chandler is someone who, if you've been listening closely to the Vikings beat, really does sound like he's going to have more of a 1B role versus, a pure backup role behind Aaron Jones. And as we saw, I think it was against your Bengals, Chris, in week 14, week 15 last year, the one game Alexander Madison missed, they were willing to give Tyler Chandler a true every down role, end up, racking up over 20 touches in that game. So Ty Chandler, certainly someone I continue to prioritize, as is the case with all fantasy grades. When they give us a really good grade, it's because we had a really good draft. When it's not as good of a grade, they're fantasy grades. Who freaking gives a crap what they're saying to us in the first place? But again, just, one small flaw is just the fact that we only have Kyler Murray, which I do recommend. You do not need a second quarterback just for the sake of having it, but because, the way it's calculated, we're getting a bad quarterback room. But yeah, a lot more balanced elsewhere. Like we really don't have a hole in this roster. 6th in RB, 6th in wide receiver, and even 5th in tight end. So again, as you can see, with kind of the capital being spent on the players, which is a pretty cool feature of our lovely draft champion tool, very much in line with the rest of our league, other than at quarterback, where again, just more so because we didn't take a backup. So it would have liked Kyron Williams over Devin Achane. It says we drafted most like Mr. Dwayne McFarland, which, hey, Chris, I don't think is a bad thing at all. Top player was, in fact, Jahmyr Gibbs. So, again, starting lineup from this team where we did go ahead and go 2 running backs first and a little bit softer at wide receiver. Kyler at QB, Gibbs and Achane at running back, Debo, Devonta Smith, Amari Cooper, Rashee Rice, Curtis Samuel holding down the wide receiver room. Got Kyle Pitts at tight end, Chase Brown, Ty Chandler, Khalil Herbert, some of the backup running back options. So again, Chris, don't exactly, I think we're going to be a little hard-pressed in the upcoming weeks, particularly if the Ayuk trade does end up coming to fruition. Debo is probably not going to be available in round 3, but someone like Jalen Waddle, someone like Nico Collins could have replaced him. Regardless, man, kind of a situation where, guess what? You're not taking a wide receiver until round 3. You're not going to have a top 5 option at that position, but you got to feel pretty good about, again, having the opportunity to get, some pretty solid onesies at quarterback and tight end. And our running back room, man, pretty strong.
And I think it's less about the names. I mean, people will look at the names and be like, well, I don't want Amari Cooper, or I don't want Rashee Rice because he may or may not get suspended. Think less about the names and the archetype of receiver, the profile of the receiver that we took at that position. And that's again where I'll point back to the tiers. Go back, fantasylife.com, take a look at the rankings and tiers, and see the guys that are available in that same block. So if you don't like Rashee Rice, take a guy that might be going around his ADP. If you don't like any, like Amari Cooper, take a guy that's going to be around his ADP, because you're still getting the same type of player. But if you're more invested in that, in their particular situation, and they're still projected for a similar amount of points, you can go that route versus honing in on the name and saying, like, I don't like this particular guy, I want somebody different. And you can get somebody different. It just depends on where they wind up on the tiers.
As we get into our last mock draft, we're going to make this one more of an elite quarterback tight end build. So I don't think you need to go out of your way in the first 2 rounds for either of those positions. But if you do want the best, you do need to start looking at them in round 3 and round 4. So picking out of the 105, ended up taking Bijan Robinson there, and then got Marvin Harrison Jr. in round 2 to, again, kind of set up those positions. But now, Chris, guess what? We feel like using a round 3 pick on a quarterback. That means we can get the reigning QB1. He beat Hurts last year. He's been QB1 or QB2 each of the last 4 years. Mr. Josh Allen, come on down to the squad. So again, you're spending this high draft capital on a quarterback. You're spending it on the tight end. You are starting them no matter what. You're going to have a bye week eventually you have to deal with. You will deal with that later. Do not be using late round picks purely on a backup at these positions when you instead could get the, sort of handcuff running back who's going to be on everyone's wish list as early as week 2, week 3. Because again, you're not benching Josh Allen. Don't worry about the backup. So got Josh there. As we get into round 4 now, Trey McBride and Mark Andrews still on the board. Look, Chris, I recognize what Trey McBride did last year. It was great. It was also in an offense with 0 other places to throw the football. In this case, we already have Marvin Harrison Jr. We're not competing against hundreds of thousands of other people, so I'm not trying to build this, mega stack. I feel like Mark Andrews, man, should be the pretty clear-cut tight end 3 in fantasy football, and honestly, I continue to be surprised that he's not.
I don't see why he wouldn't be. I think it's just more of the injury-prone tendencies that we have as a fantasy community to try and say, well, there's always something going on with him, or the fact that his quarterback can't stay healthy like throughout most of the offseason. The man's sick with something going on. So I get the consternation, but yeah, from a yards per route run standpoint, from a targets per route run standpoint, it's Mark Andrews like over Trey McBride fairly easily for me.
Got the full draft board up so you guys can kind of get an idea again of where a lot of these guys are going, and big run of running backs, in the round 2 and round 3, but that's where a lot of these guys are going on average, at least with ESPN settings. And again, reminder that we do give you guys the opportunities, whether it's Yahoo, Sleeper, FFPC, Underdog. I mean, again, you can kind of put in whatever ADP you're looking for there. So able to, again, start off the draft with Bijan, Marvin Harrison Jr., Josh Allen, Mark Andrews. I mean, I don't know about you, Chris, but whenever I finish a draft, I really like to just kind of go through and imagine the best case scenarios for everyone. And Bijan, Marv, Josh, and Andrews, I mean, at a minimum, man, we'll see what Marv does. I don't want to get too carried away, but yeah, we got some ballers holding down the positions.
I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably one of the top wide receivers in most folks' database that has been doing charting.
Yeah.
I know that was the case for Dwayne when he was doing the rookie supermodel. Matt Harmon's reception, like one of the highest grades, like throughout the community. So 1,300, 1,200 yards. I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely outlandish to expect that from Marvin Harrison, especially given the state of the Cardinals defense at this point. I kind of dig it. I mean, I don't see that as being at least too outlandish of a call for one Marvin Harrison Jr.'s rookie season. So if you want to have him as your wide receiver 1 versus trying to pair him with another wide receiver going in the first round, totally fine by me.
Went ahead and simulated the rest of the draft, so probably wouldn't have, gone out and drafted guys like Zamir White and Najee Harris like the computer did. But you know what? I do think this does show that, hey, when you are using 2 of your top 4 picks on quarterback and tight end, guess what? Those are the types of running backs that are probably going to be filling out your lineup, and the wide receiver room accordingly is going to be a bit shallow as well. So Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, Jackson Smith and Najigba, Xavier Worthy, and also Josh Downs rounding out that group. So not saying those guys aren't good players, but again, when JSN is your wide receiver 3 versus your wide receiver 5, certainly can be a bit more, skeptical about what he's bringing to the table. So again, weaker on quarterback, but certainly have a stud tight end in Mark Mark Andrews, who we're not going to have to worry about taking off the field. Same thing with Josh Allen under center. So again, Chris, if there was one shiny draft strategy that worked in every single circumstance, I would love to hear about it, but I just don't think that's exactly the case. Just trying to, take the draft as it goes and just identifying the value along the way. I do think it's going to continue to be your best bet more times than not. But as we've now done a lot of these mock drafts, any just big overarching lessons? Because I guess just personally, man, I do think balance is, a pretty solid approach. And as much as, we just did the most balanced one possible, going, running back, wide receiver,
Yeah.
quarterback, and tight end, I do think, again, the tier-based drafting, which we have in our rankings tool, and Dwayne and myself have been publishing tiers articles. I mean, it's asking yourself at every point, what can I get now that I can't get later? You made the great point earlier where, guess what? The guys going around the turn also have quarterbacks. So why are we going to reach on a quarterback now when we'll probably come back to it? Being aware of the board, being aware of the tiers and kind of the breakers there, I think any strategy can work, potentially when the draft falls your way. It's just making sure you're really not left in the dust, at some of these positions. And, it's fun to get some mock drafts out of the way to make sure we don't do just that.
I think the overarching, at least mantra that's always in my head going into drafts is the Bruce Lee saying, be like water, where you might come in with a strategy. And you might say, like, I want to be 0 RB. Like, I'm that type of person. Or I want to do hero RB. Or I want to do this. But things change. Like, if you get the 103 position, like we talked about at the very first mock, having, like, at least trying to do like a hero RB type of strategy probably isn't as viable, because you're giving up that elite wide receiver in order to do that. You're passing by CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill in order to start off saying, like, I need to have Breece Hall or I need to have Bijan Robinson. So be like water. Adjust your strategy based off of what the board gives you, and then use some of the guidelines that we provide and use the rankings and tiers as kind of guardrails. Like, I think of them, and I think the analogy has probably been used a bunch throughout the community, but using rankings and tiers is kind of like the bumpers on a bowling lane to kind of, like, keep you within the lines of, the lines of ADP. That allows you then to be as flexible as possible, so you're not reaching at positions. You're not trying to make sure that you're staying ahead of your league. You're the one that's dictating things, and you're also building an optimal roster at the same time. So check out all the content that we have for drafts, like, out there on the site. Again, FantasyLife.com, from rankings and tiers, draft strategy pieces that I've put up there, and all the rest of the crew has, that at least get you in that mindset so that regardless of what draft position you're in, whether it's the 101 or the 112, like, you're at least mentally prepared in order to draft from that spot, because your feelings might change. Like, if you got the 101, you're like, sweet, I've got CMC or I've got, like, CeeDee Lamb. At the 112, you're like, well, dang, I've got a busted a Puka Nacua with a busted Bursa sack or somebody else. Like, I don't even know. Like, it makes you feel different, but it doesn't matter how you feel. It just matters you can still put together a good strategy, a good viable strategy, regardless of what draft position you're in. So check out the content we got, folks.
Like how I rambled for 5 minutes and Chris just put it all into 3 words. Be like water. That's what we're talking about, everyone. And also great analogy with the tiers and the bumpers. Wish they had bumpers for golf. I wouldn't have to go chase my drives in that rough, quite as often. But again, guys, speaking of tiers, we'll be right back here tomorrow. Myself and Dwayne The Rock McFarland talking all things wide receiver tiers, 9 a.m. Eastern, as always, like we are Monday through Friday for the foreseeable future. So appreciate you guys for tuning in to the Fantasy Life Show. As always, for Chris, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.